This video is designed to be a review of the elements of fiction. It's important that you take note of each of the elements that we're going to review in this video, as we will be spending time throughout this course looking at each of these elements in a more in-depth manner. So let's take a look just to see what the elements of fiction are. Okay, these are going to be the main elements of fiction, and we are going to, as I said, spend some time discussing them throughout this year. We have plot, setting, character, conflict, symbol, point of view, and I've also added theme at the bottom. You'll notice that theme is in parentheses. It's not really an element of fiction, it's really much more the result of a story, but I've tossed it into this video just because of its importance, and it is something that we often look at the same time as we're looking at these other elements. So that's kind of why it's just in here at the end of the video. So let's take a look at plot. Rarely is plot the most important element of a good story, but it's usually the plot that initially attracts us to a story and initially gets us kind of involved. And so it is important to take a look at plot and understand the way plot's set up. Plot is, of course, the arrangement of events that make up a story, and the plot usually revolves around a conflict. Conflict is usually resolved by the end of the story. We have some kind of resolution to the problem, but not always. In general, plot follows a pattern. Again, this is not set in stone. Stories can follow different patterns, but this is the most general form of a traditional story. We start with the exposition that gives us the background information, gives us information about things like setting. And then we have the rising action. Those are the events that are building up throughout the story to the climax, which is the most exciting point of the story. Then, after the most exciting part, we have this falling action. The fancy term for that is denouement. And then at the end, again, if it's following this pattern, we have a resolution. You may have seen a plot diagram that looks like this image that just appeared on your screen. This flat line that starts it is the exposition. The line going up is the rising action. The very tippy top, the point, is the climax. And then after that we have the falling action, or the denouement. The point at the very end would be the resolution, so how the whole story works out. Again, this is an ideal pattern. Not all stories are going to follow this. Let's take a look a little bit at setting. There are two types of setting when we talk about setting. There's the physical setting, that is the where the story takes place, and there's a chronological setting, that is the when of the story. So when we're talking about setting, we're talking about two types, two pieces of it. Physical is the where, chronological is the when. And it's really important to pay attention to the setting. The author has chosen that setting for a very specific reason. It may because during that time period it has some kind of historical significance, perhaps its location, there's a geographical significance, or sometimes an author will choose a very general setting. They're not very specific in when and where the story takes place, and that's to give it a universal nature, so that story could be applied to any time or any place. In some instances, it makes the story much more easily you can relate to that. So when you're looking at setting, it seems sometimes like a minor piece of the story, but the author has a purpose in choosing that setting. It is important that you take a look at that as you're looking at pieces of fiction. Next we're going to look at is character. When we're talking about character, when we talk about the protagonist, that's going to be the major character of the piece. And the antagonist is the character that sparks the story's conflict. We also have secondary characters. Those are minor characters that support the major character. When we're talking about characters in a work, there are two different types of characters. There are dynamic and there are static. Dynamic characters show some kind of change throughout the piece. So somewhere from the beginning of the story to the end of the story, somewhere over the course of that story, the character has changed in some way. Maybe they've changed a belief or a way of acting, their behavior. Those are dynamic characters. There are also then static characters. Static characters are characters that stay exactly the same from beginning to end. They never experience any kind of change. They never demonstrate a change. When you're reading a piece of fiction, it's important to evaluate the characters. And there are different ways to do that. 3 main questions you can ask yourself. What does the individual say? What does the individual do? And what do others say about the individual? It's really important when you're analyzing character and you make some kind of claim about a character. Like maybe you say the protagonist, the major character, is very brave. You can't just say that without supporting it with facts from the story. So, what does the individual say to show you that they're brave? What does the individual do to show you that he or she is brave? So it's really important that you use those questions to pull support from the text to support your answer. Let's take a look at conflict. Conflict is what drives a story. So there are external forms of conflict. External forms of conflict include man versus man, so one character is against another character or group of characters. There is man versus nature, so think about survival stories like there is an avalanche on the mountain and people are buried in snow and now they're battling the elements to try and reach safety. That would be man versus nature. And then there's also man versus supernatural. So alien invasion stories, a lot of science fiction would have these supernatural elements. Horror stories often contain elements of the supernatural, the ghosts, the zombies, that kind of thing. Those are all external forms of conflict. Other stories might include internal conflict. This is man versus himself. So the character has to come to some major decision within his or her own life. And they're really kind of indecisive, they're not sure what to do. That's internal conflict. Symbol. Symbols sometimes scare students. They hear the word symbolism and immediately start to get a little bit nervous. But really a symbol is just something that means something else. Symbols can often be interpreted in different ways. Not everything is a symbol, but symbols really add an extra layer of meaning to a piece of fiction. So it is important that we at least pay attention and we start to look for these symbols. And you're going to find as you read that there are a lot of symbols that are used over and over and over again in different works of literature. They're called recurring symbols. So, for instance, the number 3 pops up a lot. That's a symbol. As we move through the course, we are going to take a look at some of those in the pieces of fiction that we read. And as I mentioned before, really the purpose of symbols, they add interest, they add depth to a story. Point of view. The point of view is how the story is told, or another way of looking at it is who is the one telling the story. And the story can change depending upon whose point of view you're getting. There is a first-person point of view. So this is when somebody is directly in the story and they're the ones telling it. So for instance, first-person protagonist, that is the main character of the story is the one telling you the story. First-person observer is one of those secondary characters in the story telling you the story. In first-person point of view, you're going to see lots of I's in the narration. Because it's the character in the story, I, telling you it. The other point of view is third-person point of view. And third-person point of view is going to give you kind of a broader spectrum of the story. Instead of just being stuck in one person's mind, like in first person, you get a broader image. Third-person omniscient, you see the thoughts and feelings of multiple characters, of everything that's going on in the story. So you see the action from all of the characters' point of view. You can get into their heads. It's like you are hovering overhead and you are all-knowing. That's what the omniscient part is. Third-person dramatic narrator, you almost get a camera's perspective. So you see all of the action, you see all of the dialogue and exchanges that are going on, but you can't necessarily get into the characters' heads. Think of the third-person dramatic narrator as a camera. It's kind of panning the entire outside of the story. Again, third person does give you a larger perspective. First person often is very biased because you only get the point of view of one person in that story. Theme. As promised, we are going to just briefly talk about theme. That's not, again, really one of the elements, but is a result of the story. Theme should not be confused with topic. Topic of a story might be one word. The theme cannot only be one word, because the theme is actually a broad statement about a topic. So what do I mean by that difference? Well, you might say that the topic of a story is love, and you can do that. You can say it with only one word. But then the theme is a statement about that topic. So, very genetic, very cliche, the theme of the story is that love is the most important thing in the world. Notice, theme is not just one word. Okay, it is a statement about that one word topic. Also notice that I did not say that theme is the same as moral. Sometimes when we talk about theme, we confuse it with moral. But the moral of the story really implies that there's a positive meaning or a positive idea to that story. And theme doesn't necessarily mean something positive. You can have a negative theme. So be careful about using those words synonymously or interchangeably, because they really are two very different things. Hopefully this video has helped kind of refresh your memory of the concepts that you probably have already studied coming into the course. As always, I would suggest if you need to review this video at any point, it will always be up and available to you, so go back and review it at any point that you need to. As always, if you have any questions about any of the concepts in the video, make sure that you talk to your teacher. Thanks!